As I came back from lunch, I had gone into the hotel, into my room during the lunch break. And as I came back out, I walked around the corner into the plaza area where the pool was, and all of the dignitaries that we'd been teaching leadership over the last day and a half were gathered having their lunch. Well, they had finished up their lunches and gone back inside, and it was about time for someone else to speak, but we weren't quite ready to get started yet. We were still waiting on a few people to trickle in. And as I rounded the corner and saw the pool area, I was blown away by the amount of trash. Now, I had seen maybe a straw paper or a wrapper for a fork and knife as I came around the corner. And I picked those up along the sidewalk. And when I walked into the pool area, I was blown away that at every table, at every seat, there was garbage on the ground. So I started picking it up. I didn't want it all to blow into the pool. I know how much damage that could do. So I started picking up the trash. And at one point I looked down and both of my hands were so full, I couldn't pick up any more trash because I had nowhere to put it. And as I looked up, Dr. Jeffrey Mitchell, who was in the Congo teaching with me, was coming at me with the trash can in his hand. And so I dumped everything that I had in the trash can, and we went about the business over the next 5 or 10 minutes picking up all of the trash all the way around the pool from every seat. Now, we were in the Congo to train government leaders. These are people who are the biggest representatives of the Congo and who their people are. These are the ones who go to the government as representatives of their local communities, of their local neighborhoods, and represent them. They're also the ones who speak to the communities about what the government wants to do differently. And so these 50 people are gathered together, the 30 different political parties. We have governors in the room, we have provincial governors in the room, we have senators in the room. And later I found out, I didn't know this, but later I found out that while we were picking up the garbage, they were sitting in their chairs inside using their cell phones taking pictures of us. 2 of the 4 instructors that were teaching this entire seminar in suits and ties out walking around the pool picking up their garbage. Well, I didn't realize they were taking pictures of that. I didn't even know that they noticed. I wasn't paying attention to them. It wasn't why I did it. I did it because it was the right thing to do and it needed to be done and there wasn't anybody else doing it. So I did it. A few hours later, I was hanging out with one of the 20-somethings from that group, and he asked me, why did you pick up the garbage? Was that an object lesson or were you trying to teach them something special? And I said, no, it was the right thing to do. It needed to be done, so I did it. And Dr. Jeffrey said exactly the same thing. It just needed to be done. That's why we did it. We weren't asking anybody to pay any attention or give us any accolades. We just knew it was the right thing to do. That's the difference between a manager and a leader. A manager knows how to get people to do the right thing. A leader just does the right thing. You get that? It's one thing to tell people how to do something. It's another thing to do it as a demonstration. It wasn't my objective or my goal to teach them in that way. It was simply doing the right thing because that's what I'm in the habit of. I do the same thing with my children. I do it first. Now, I may do it and then bring them alongside and say, this is what I've done and this is why I've done it that way, but I will also at some point just simply expect it of them. I shouldn't have to tell them to go do the right thing. They should know to do the right thing because they've seen it modeled long enough. When we got to day 2, nearing the end of the day, actually nearing the end of the seminar, we were all brought back up for some questions and answers. And one of the questions that was asked of me, they said, you know, you talk about, and this is through an interpreter, so it's not exactly the question that I heard, but the gist of it was you talk about all these different principles of leadership, about servanthood, about doing the right thing every time, and all these different things. And as you talk about that, I have to ask the question, who is the one person you've seen who's the best leader? Who's the best example that we could follow? Where do we get these principles for ourselves? And without hesitation, my answer is simple. Who's the best leader that I know that demonstrates all of these characters and all of these qualities? It's Jesus Christ. Now, lay aside the ideologies of religion and just ask yourself this question, and this is the same answer I gave them. Name one person in history whose public service time was 3 years long, and 2,000 years later they're still being talked about. Name one person in history who in a 3-year term of public service, had 12 leaders who are still influential leaders today. You can't name one. Can't be done. But let's look also at the model of the things that Jesus did day after day, every day. What he modeled, what he taught, is still being taught 2,000 years later. Now, were there ever leaders that were like him? Absolutely. There were characteristics of Jesus in Joshua. There were characteristics of Jesus in Moses. There were characteristics of Jesus in David. And each of those different examples, even Joseph, and the fact that he laid down his life as a servant, and then as first as a slave, then as a servant to Potiphar's house, then in the prison, and then he became exalted as a leader within the prison. How does that happen? Well, it happens because the character of your heart looks like, acts like, behaves like, and leads like a true leader. And then eventually Joseph became the assistant to Pharaoh and in charge of all of Egypt. Now that's a pretty big deal when you look at where he started. Over the next week, maybe longer than that, because I think there's 10 or 12 of them that I want to pull out, we're going to look at biblical leaders from Genesis all the way through who exemplified the character and the nature of Christ, who exemplified the call of good leadership, to influence where you are, to delegate the people around you who are anointed or gifted to do certain things, to find the good in other people even when they can't see it in themselves. All of those characteristics are the nature of Christ, but they're also what the Word says we're supposed to be as good leaders, as good fathers, as good husbands. Do the right thing so that other people can watch. John Maxwell says people do what people see. It's the law of the picture. If we don't do the thing that we want others to do, then what we're going to see in those who are following us is an entirely different result. Now, how do we know that Jesus as a leader was doing the right thing? The verse you see on the screen there is Luke chapter 3, 21 and 22, and it talks about Jesus when he was baptized and how from heaven God said, "That's my boy, that's my son. That's the one I love and in whom I am well pleased." And above all the other things that Jesus would do or accomplish in his ministry, in that moment the Father acknowledged, "That's my son, and I love him, and I'm happy with him," before a single miracle had been done, before a single teaching, aside from his conversation as a youth with the synagogue leaders, before any of the works of his public life had been accomplished. God acknowledged him. That's my boy. Now, once that foundation was set, and he had his confrontation with Satan, everything Satan said questioned his identity. Do you ever find yourself in that position as a leader where someone questions your authority, questions your identity, questions your ability to make a decision to do what you're supposed to do? Have you ever found someone challenging your influence and going, "People don't pay any attention to you. You can just stop talking because nobody cares what you have to say. You can go back to your corner because this is not your place." I think we've all, whether we've been managers or leaders at any level, have all experienced that at some point. My son was, back during the summer before he went back to school, was promoted to a shift supervisor. And at his work, there were some new employees, and when he told them, "You need to do things this way," they're like, "Who are you to tell me? I don't know you nothing." And immediately the manager came in and went, "No, he's the shift supervisor. I've given him that rank and authority. I've given him that position. You need to do what he says." Now, it's real easy for a 17-year-old to let that go to their head and just start ordering people around. "You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this." What works really well, though, is to simply demonstrate. When the enemy came in and told Jesus, "If you really are the Son of God, change the stones to bread," Jesus said, "No, I don't have to. Besides which, the Father didn't tell me to." And that really was the key to the whole thing. The whole confrontation between the enemy and the Lord was that God didn't say so. Daddy didn't say I was supposed to do that. And if you look at the example of Jesus' life from beginning to end, the 3 years he was in public life, his answer was always, "I do what the Father tells me to do. I say what the Father tells me to say." Now, this is going to sound really trite and simplistic, but I'm going to be perfectly honest with you and tell you, I don't care what level of leadership you are. If you will listen to what the Father says, not what the boss says, not what the economy says. Now, of course, you've got to be under authority in your job. So if there is a boss above you, you've got to do what they tell you to honor them. But don't let what they tell you to do discount what God told you to do. And don't let the two become a conflict. If they become a conflict, always do what God says. I know that sounds hard. It's a tough call. But if you'll do what the Father says every time, if you'll listen to the Holy Spirit, learn to hear his voice, and simply do what the Father says to do, most of the time you're not going to run in conflict with your boss. Most of the time you're not going to run in conflict with the economy or the market or the government if you're doing what God said. Most of the time. There will be times that you will be tested. There are rising areas of Sharia law. We're doing the will of Jesus Christ, the Almighty Father. That will is counter to what Sharia law says. It's really hard to pray in the way that Jesus says to pray under Sharia law. Daniel experienced a very similar thing. It became the law of the land that you couldn't pray as Daniel had been told to pray. Then Daniel found himself in the lion's den and then in the fiery furnace as a result of his obedience to God, which became disobedience to the government. But leaders don't look at what's comfortable. Leaders don't ask the question, is this immediately profitable? Leaders ask the question, is this what the Father told me to do? In the last series we just finished, From Invisible to Invincible, one of the things that we talked about was the fact that intimacy is power. Our intimacy with God, that close relationship that we have got with God the Father, is what allows us to stand against all odds. And if you have that kind of intimacy with God, where you're listening to the Holy Spirit and you're in tune with the Word, you're going to find that even in those greatest trials, the Father will step in for you, like he did the fiery furnace, like he did in Daniel's lion's den. When the trials came, the Holy Spirit came as well. When the struggles came, God showed up. If you will lead that way, then you're going to find that every time you're obedient to the Father, the world's got nothing on you. Over the next week, we're going to talk about some biblical leaders. We're going to talk about some of the things that made Moses different than Joshua and Joshua different than David. And as we talk about those leadership characteristics, I hope you'll take notes on things that you could do a little bit better to be an influential leader. But know this, if you are born again, you are a child of the living God, and your Father does look down from heaven and say, that's my boy, that's my girl. And in that moment, all the authority of heaven and earth is in your tongue. You have the right and the power to speak life and to speak death. So use it wisely. Are you the kind of leader that people look to and say, if I could just model that behavior, if I could just do things that I see them doing, then I would be on the right path? Are you doing what the Father says in such a way that other people look at you and go, that's what the Father would do? I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.